Welcome to Reading the Bible Together and to the story of Joseph, which continues today in Genesis chapter 40. Now, when we last left our hero, he'd been imprisoned, unjustly accused of sexual assault by the frustrated wife of the betrayed Potiphar. However, as seems to be the theme of Joseph's life, he profits despite his misfortune, due, as we are repeatedly reminded, to the Lord being with him. Now, while it initially was his father's household and his brothers that he oversaw, and secondly, the household of Potiphar, now it is Pharaoh's prison he effectively runs, the warden having placed the whole operation in Jacob's hands. Or as the text eloquently puts it, the warden paid no attention to anything under Joseph's care. Well, two new characters are introduced, the Pharaoh's cupbearer and his chief baker. Who knows what they've done to provoke Pharaoh's ire? Perhaps a meal had made Pharaoh unwell. But to their horror, they end up in the clink, and responsibility for them is given to Joseph. An unspecified period of time passes. What is Joseph thinking about in these long weeks? When Pharaoh's cupbearer and his chief baker, who were being held in prison, note the pattern of repetition again, a reminder that these chapters exist are retold verbally with repeated refrains like a song. The Pharaoh's cupbearer and his chief baker who were being held in prison each have a dream. We read, when Joseph came to them the next morning, he saw that they were dejected. So he asked Pharaoh's officials who were in custody with him in his master's house, just in case we forgot from the previous verse, why do you look so sad today? Aha, you say, this is oddly familiar. Isn't there another story in the Bible about a dejected cupbearer who is asked why he looks so dejected? Why, yes, there is. That cupbearer is known as Nehemiah, and he too is the cupbearer to a foreign king, Artaxerxes of Persia. In that case, in Nehemiah chapter 2, we read, in the month of Nisan, in the 20th year of King Artaxerxes, when wine was brought for him, I took the wine and gave it to the king. I had not been sad in his presence before, so the king asked me, why does your face look so sad when you're not ill? This can be nothing but sadness of heart. Now, while the English translation of that Nehemiah passage sounds a bit different from the Joseph story, in Hebrew, the key words translated dejected and sad are the same in both stories. Now, in the Joseph story, the sadness eventually leads to the rise of Joseph in Egypt and the saving from starvation of the Hebrew people. In Nehemiah, it leads to the restoration of Jerusalem. Now, we're often told to pay attention to history as it repeats itself. The Bible does so too. Stories like Joseph's reverberate throughout. So, back to the Joseph story. We're told that the sadness of the cupbearer results from vivid but puzzling dreams. And Joseph, himself a dreamer, remember the dreams which so offended his family, says, do not interpretations belong to God? Tell them to me. So, the cupbearer tells of his dream. Now to Joseph, the interpretation is clear. The cupbearer will be returned to Pharaoh's favor. And when you are, says Joseph, put in a good word for me. After all, I've done nothing to deserve being put in a dungeon. Now, a bit of an exaggeration there. We've been repeatedly told that he's not in a dungeon, but is in the house of the captain of the guards, more like Club Fed than Alcatraz, sort of a form of house arrest. Prison, yes, but hardly rotting away, chained to a wall in a dark and slimy cell, but nevertheless, prison. Encouraged by the positive interpretation given to the cupbearer for his dream, that everything's going to work out right, the baker tells Joseph his. And this time the interpretation is equally clear, but not so good. The baker says Joseph will be hanged. The word's actually impaled, left to rot for the birds to consume. That's not so good. And note significantly that Joseph doesn't ask the baker to put in a good word for him because the baker is not going to be held in high esteem by the Pharaoh. Well, of course, the dreams do come true. Joseph's interpretation of them is spot on, which is good news for the cupbearer, Bad news for the baker, who is ultimately blamed for what I presume to be Pharaoh's bad case of food poisoning. But now the punchline. The chief cupbearer, however, did not remember Joseph. He forgot him. Now, we know this is important because the point's driven home. He did not remember him. He forgot him. And that's where the chapter ends. And not only the chapter in our Bibles, in synagogues to this day, where there are annual cycles of readings, this whole cycle ends here too. For centuries, people have been left hanging. What will happen to Joseph next? And peeking ahead, the very next words in the text are, when 2 full years have passed. It seems as though the Lord is with Joseph, and part of the Lord being with him is the long and time-consuming transformation of Joseph from arrogant snot, telling exaggerated stories of his brother's incompetence, to someone worthy of saving an entire nation from famine and securing the survival of those same brothers. And that kind of transformation takes time. And while we see in this chapter Joseph's impatience and self-justification, the ancient rabbis point out that, wait a minute here, Joseph, don't try to pretend that you didn't lead Potiphar's wife on with your good looks and your swinging ankles. I'm still trying to figure out that whole swinging ankles thing from last time. Does it imply a self-conscious, sexy strut rather than a humble walk? I don't know. Anyway, don't try to pretend that it was your own... don't try to pretend that it wasn't your own arrogance which caused your brother's resentment of you, leading to the whole throw him in a pit plan and your eventual arrival in Egypt. You see, this extended time in prison is nothing other than an exercise in learning humility. For, say the ancient rabbis, if you really want to achieve greatness, you first have to experience and understand just what humility is. And I seem to recall not only the ancient rabbis like Nachmanides and Rashi and Nahmanides, I seem to recall Jesus saying much the same thing. If you really want to achieve greatness, you first have to experience and understand just what humility is. But more of that next time in Genesis chapter 41. And speaking of next time, as the action builds, our pace is going to slow down a bit to 2 studies a week rather than 3, to allow us more time to look ever more closely at the story God is telling us through these amazing scriptures. After all, if Joseph can learn patience, maybe it's time for us to do the same. And we'll see you then.